What a wicked takeoff. What an absolute wicked takeoff. Hold back crosswind, gust and 7, you're traffic state 9523 going around the runway. I'm going to demonstrate these up to 15 knots. I mean, that is wicked. You can feel the airplane stressing.
Hey guys, it's Safety Pilot. I'm Andrew, and today we're going to be talking about tailwheel flying. Tailwheel flying, also known as tail dragger flying or conventional landing gear flying, used to be the main way airplanes were flown. Nowadays we have tricycle gears, which are much more common, considered much more stable, safer. It's becoming rare to find, especially young pilots who fly tailwheel. I think this is disappointing, and I'm a big proponent of tailwheel flying. I think it's a blast. I think it has a lot of benefits, and we're going to be talking about those as well as the basics of tailwheel flying. So let's jump right into it. I drew up here the typical diagram to show you when you're learning tailwheel flying. This is a little different. I modified it. But essentially here we have a tricycle gear. You have the nose in the front, and then you have the mains, and you have your center of mass, essentially, moving. And then the blue outline is showing a vector. So if we're tracking down the center line of the runway, everything's working as it should be. All of our wheels are aligned. If we land with a little bit of a wind blowing us to the side, or if we have a little bit of cross load, say we did a crab and we didn't straighten out after the crab, you can see that the center of gravity, or the center of mass of the airplane, is in front of the main wheels. So in this situation, we're going to touch down, and we're going to kind of get jerked to the left, as I'm sure most pilots have experienced when they've landed with a little bit of a crab and getting some side loading. But the center of mass is going to drag us back to the center line, and the wheels are still going to stay in line. So we're still pretty stable. As long as we can get the nose on the ground, our tricycle will keep us nice and stable. With tailwheel, we have our center of mass behind the main wheels. And what that means is when we get into a crab, and we land with side load, or if we land with a strong crosswind, it's weather vaning pushing on the tail, our center of mass has a tendency to spin and get in front of the mains. Now all of a sudden our mass wants to get in front, and it's going to spin the airplane, and that's going to end up getting us in a ground loop. We're going to spin, centrifugal force is going to push the aircraft over, putting a lot of weight on this left wheel, and especially if the wind's blowing from the right, it's going to lift the right wing, and we're going to ground loop. Our left wing is going to spin around, it's going to hit the ground, and we might even flip nose over. Keep the tail wheel in between the mains, and no side loading, absolutely no side loading. You want to come in straight, you want to come in slow, you don't want to come in with excessive speed, which could result in a ground loop, especially if you aren't good with the rudder and the tail gets off to one side. It's going to want to continue to keep going to the side, and you're going to roll. Alright, I'm heading out to the plane. Today's projected to be a full windsock day. It's 14 knots right now, but it's projected to get up to 25 knots. So it's a headwind. We got a headwind runway, so it shouldn't be any problem. Let's head to the plane. It's only about 10 knots right now. Judging by that windsock, we got two sections of it, so we'll probably go up and do some crosswind stuff. But anyway, here's the plane, the Cessna 140. Quickly pre-flight it, hop in, and we'll go up. So with tailwheel flying, the first thing that they'll teach you is you always want stick full back. So that's what we're going to start off with. We always want to have the stick full back. That's going to keep the tail down. Anytime we bring the tail down or the tail is resting on the ground, we want to keep it on the ground.
So right now you can see the tail is broken, so if I just add power, it's just going to keep spinning. Now if I hold the left rudder, now I catch it. So once the wheel comes to the point where the rudder and the wheel line up where they should be, it'll catch it. Just like a hook. And now we have the tail wheel now holding left rudder. We're going to come back to the left. And I now have control. I've caught the tail wheel. Again, so we're taxiing out right now on gravel, so we're keeping the RPM low. That's going to keep those rocks on the ground. You wouldn't ever really want to, unless you have to do your run-up on gravel. And as well, if you're going to do a takeoff roll on gravel, you want to increase the throttle slowly. As long as you have enough distance, you don't want to go full power immediately. You don't want to hold the brakes and do like a short field takeoff on gravel, because that's going to pick up all the rocks and throw them into the propeller while you're sitting still. So ideally on gravel, and if you have loose sand or something like that too, you want to slowly increase the throttle. You want to get moving, and then push in full throttle. That's going to help relieve the damage of any rocks or anything that's going to be thrown into the horizontal stabilizer and elevator. The last time I flew on this field, there were not hay bales out here, and it was much better mowed. So taller grass, more friction, it's going to take longer to get off the ground. And then because they put hay bales out here, I don't know what else they were doing. This is a strip I've taken off for many times, but again, never had these bales out here before. So I'm just going to taxi slowly over the field and just kind of look on the ground, make sure there's nothing else that would bother me. It's still plenty wide enough to take off from. So we're just going to examine the field, and then we'll turn back around and take off into the wind. Alright, we got some big shrubs here at the end, some not dandelions, I don't know what these are, but they're yellow. Superior traffic, Cessna 89523, back taxi, runway 04, grass, Superior traffic. Alright, the runway looks pretty good. I'm going to do another pass going back the other way, now with the tailwind. So when you're taxiing a tailwind airplane, you always want to stick full back, unless you have a really strong tailwind. So it's a debatable point, but the prop wash is going to push air back on the tail, so you want the elevator up. That, combined with the headwind, is going to help keep the tail wheel down. Now, if you have a strong tailwind, people argue that you should have the elevator far forward, because that's going to bring the elevator down, and that's going to help the wind from behind push the tail down. And that is true, but you need to know for your specific airplane, when will the tailwind be stronger than the prop wash? Because the prop is still pushing air back, so even if you have a light tailwind, say 10 knots, the prop's going to be pushing more air back than the wind is going to be pushing on the tail. So you still want to have full back. All right, so we've lined up. We've gone down to the end of the field. We've come back. We've checked it. We have about a 12-knot headwind, maybe closer to 10 right now by that windsock. I'd say it's over 10, but it's not quite 15. So on takeoff here, we're going to raise the tail. And so most tailwheel airplanes are designed to be able to take off from their three-point attitude. So as they sit on the ground, they can take off. Their angle of attack is not beyond their critical, so they will not stall at the three-point. Modern aircraft are designed that way. But as we lift up the tail, we're going to get less drag. Our angle of attack is going to be lower, and we're going to have less form drag because our tail is going to come up. We're going to have less surface area from the front, so we're going to gain speed quicker. So especially on a low-powered airplane like the 140 or similar, you want to get the tail up when you can, gain airspeed, and then you're going to slowly ease back on the control to increase the angle of attack to an angle of attack which will produce enough lift to take off from the ground. Then again, you're going to want to get into ground effect, gain airspeed, and then climb again. So it's kind of this, bring the tail up, so you're kind of going full back with the elevator, then forward, then back, then forward again. So it's not a lazy takeoff, it's a fun takeoff. It's a really fun takeoff. So what I do in this, in the 140, is I'm going to line up with the runway, I'm going to add full power, I'm going to hold the brakes, again, as long as I'm not on a rough field. I'm going to hold the brakes, get up to my full static RPM, and I'm going to release the brakes and let the aircraft start rolling. And I'm going to count to 4. Once I get to 4, I'm going to push full forward on the yoke. And depending on if I've got enough speed or not, I'm going to kind of judge it. I might wait a little bit longer. But right around 4 to 5 seconds, the tail should come up just by me pushing forward. And I am going to push forward, if you push forward too early, you're going to get more drag. It's going to increase your takeoff roll. But I'm going to go full forward. It's going to bring the tail up. As the tail comes up, I'm going to come back to neutral and just keep the tail up until I gain speed. And then once the tail comes up, I'm going to count up to 9. So I'm going to keep counting. So I'm going to count to 4. Once the tail comes up, I'm going to go 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And by then, usually I have my rotate speed. Then I'm going to ease back on the controls a little bit. The tail might touch the ground, but it shouldn't. It should just come down a little bit to get an angle of attack, which is enough to produce lift to get off the ground. So that's the 9-second rule. It doesn't work on every plane, but it works pretty well on the 140. So that's what we're going to do. Looks like it's becoming a little bit of a left crosswind, but not by much. So there's my brakes. We have full static RPM. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's quite a bit of a right crosswind. So I'm full forward now. The tail is up. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and now I'm pulling a little bit back, and we're in the air. So it would have flown even a little bit earlier, before my 9-second rule, but the 9-second rule worked great. Now I'm just going to make sure we can out-climb these trees. If for some reason we weren't climbing, we could turn to the left or to the right, follow the tree line, and land back at the runway. Alright, so once you're in the air, flying a tailwheel is just the same as any other airplane. You have your typical controls. So the only difference is when you're on the ground. So we're going to get landed here. We're going to have a crosswind landing here, a pretty good right crosswind for a small airplane like this. So on a crosswind landing, it's going to be the same thing as typical. We're going to come in with probably a side flip, and we want to touch down on the right wheel first since we have a right crosswind. Now, in tailwheel, you can land 2 basic ways. You can land with a wheel landing on 2 wheels and then let the tail come down slowly, or you can land on all 3 at once. Typically, people favor a wheel landing for heavy wind conditions because you can come in with a higher airspeed, you have better visibility. So that's what we're going to go for now. Sky Harbor traffic, Cessna 89523, left base, runway 32, Sky Harbor. All right, so now as I turn base to final, I'm going to have my right wing high, and I'm having a right crosswind. So this is a dangerous point when I can feel the wind's going to keep pushing me into the turn. So I want to be ready with that to counter it with aileron. This is a pretty short field. Skyward traffic at 89523, final 32. Alright, that ended up being a 3-point. So when you're taxiing with a crosswind and a tailwheel in an airplane, you're going to get weather vaning. It's going to want to pivot around the mains. So you have a large air surface on the tail, and if we have a right crosswind, it's going to push the tail to the left, which is going to push our nose to the right. So we need to counter that with left rudder. So essentially we have it's direct. It's 90 degrees, 16-knot crosswind. So we'll need our full corrections here. We're going to have full air run into the wind. We're going to take off 1-4, a left crosswind, so we're going to have full left. We're going to expect the right wheel to come up first. And again, we're holding the tail back. We're going to lift the tail up slowly, let the tail come up after 4 seconds. Then ailerons into the wind, and then depending on what kind of gusts we're getting, we're still going to count to 9. It's going to be the same thing. We're just going to put those corrections in, and I'm going to be heavy on the rudders. Tailwheel is a dance on the rudders. And now, because the wind's coming from the left, it's pushing on the tail, and it's going to weather vane to the tail's going to go to the right. So my nose is going to be pushed left, so I need even more right rudder than I normally would. Especially for a slow taxi like this, I wouldn't really need any right rudder, just a little bit. But now I need quite a bit of right rudder. As a general rule we use with tailwheel, and again it depends on the plane, your wing is going to go out farther than your tail does. So if I want to do a really quick turn, I can snap the tailwheel and I can just twist around on the mains. And as long as my wing is not off of the taxiway, when I spin around, my tail's not going to go off the taxiway because the tail's shorter than the wing is when it gets out there. So I'm just going to position so that my right wing is right at the edge of the taxiway, but it's not over the taxiway, and then I can just snap around and I can spin. And I can spin all the way around, and I know that my tail wheel is not going to go off the runway. All right, so right now I have a tailwind, holding the tail back. Once we turn to the left here, I'm going to have a left crosswind. I'm going to turn the ailerons into the wind. So even as I start turning, I'm coming nice and slow, and I'm turning the ailerons. Now I know that the wind is going to be pushing the tail to the right, so my nose is going to go left. So I know on takeoff I'm going to need even more right rudder. All right, full back, and we're off. 3, 4. And we move to 9. And keeping center line. What a wicked takeoff. What an absolute wicked takeoff. Some good gusts, a little bit of a left crosswind. I'm coming over the ground, and I'm just going to hold the pitch that I had when I was on. Yeah, we're getting some good gusts here. And it dropped out, but I caught it. We landed on 3 wheels. That was a good 3-point. Things you want to practice when you practice tail wheel is getting up on, originally you want to start this on 3 wheels. So you're just going to hold a 3-wheel position on the ground. You're going to pick a line and you're just going to practice taxiing on it. At first nice and slow, and then faster and faster and faster as you're able. And then once you've mastered holding it on 3 wheels, a great practice is to start getting up on 2 wheels. So in order to do that, you're going to stand just like you're taking off. It's going to be similar to a boarded takeoff. You're going to add full power, bring the tail up, and then once you get the tail up, you're going to pull back power. So here I might have around like 2,400 RPM to take off. I'm going to pull back to like about 2,000, just enough to keep the tail up in the air. And then I'm going to just practice, especially this is good practice with the rudders. I'm going to practice keeping that up on the wheels, and as well keeping my directional control. Spirit traffic says 89523, doing a high-speed taxi, runway 04 grass, aborted takeoff, Spirit traffic. All right, so similar to takeoff, I'm adding full power. Releasing the brakes. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to bring the tail up, bring it nice and up, and I'm going to pull back power. And I'm just going to practice. Now here on graph I don't have a great starting point, or a great center line, but ideally I'd have a center line. I'm just going to keep on the center line. I'm going to set the power in, and especially if you can do this without brakes. The brakes help. You're going to hold it, and then you're going to pull back the power slowly, and let the tail come down on its own. You're going to have more and more forward elevator. Once the tail comes down, you pin it down. and I'm back at idle. Alright, once the main wheels touch down, I'm going to keep it up. I'm going to push forward, lower the angle of attack. Right there, I'm on the mains. I'm pushing forward, lowering the angle of attack. That's going to settle it onto the wheels. I'm holding forward until the tail comes down on its own. Once the tail comes down, I'm going to hold it down. So that's how you want to do a 2-point. The big thing on a 2-point, and this is a little controversial for some reason, is once the main wheels touch on the ground, you're usually going to touch in a little nose-high attitude, so it's not going to be perfectly level, and that's because you're going to have a higher angle of attack, you'll have a slower speed. And once you touch down, you want to rock forward. And what that's going to do is it's going to increase your visibility down the runway, which is good. It's going to lower your angle of attack, which is going to settle you under your wheels. You're going to have less lift. So you're going to have better control now that you're on the ground. Because again, you're in that period of time when a good strong gust of wind or something can make it hard to control the airplane. So the quicker you can get it settled on the ground and controllable by the wheels, the better. So you're going to rock forward and slowly bring it down, and then hold it forward, let the tail come down on its own. You don't want to pull the tail back down, because that could increase your angle of attack, and that could lift you back up into the air. So you're going to let the tail come down on its own when it's no longer flying, and let it settle down, and then you're going to hold it down. Now, some people will tell you, once you touch down on the two wheels, to build a little bit of back pressure, to kind of hold it in that same state. I would argue that the increased friction on the wheels is better controllability, and it will slow down your ground roll. Some will say that if you keep the higher angle of attack, you're creating more drag, more induced and more form drag, which will make your ground roll slower or shorter. And now, if you're a professional, I don't do this, but some people will land on the two main wheels, and then they'll rock the nose forward. So putting basically your pointed nose down into the ground on your mains. And depending on how big your mains are, if you have big Alaska bush wheels, which is most of the people who do this, you'll create a lot of form drag. You will have a low angle of attack, even a negative angle of attack, which is going to give you a lot more friction on the ground, and you're going to stop a lot slower. The risk of it is it's pretty dangerous. You have to be you want to be really proficient in the airplane to want to go nose low on it. But in theory, it would stop you quicker. All right, that'll be the end for the day.